Encapsulation is the key to clean and tidy programming practices. Classes are the tool that makes encapsulation possible. In this lecture, we will cover the basics of Java classes. In Java, every public class must be named the same as the file. If the file is called student.java, then the public class inside must be named student. At the top of the file, the package must also be declared. Packages are used to organize code into namespaces so that large projects can remain manageable. Classes also have access modifiers. The modifier public means the class or one of its members can be used from anywhere. Private means the member can only be used inside the same class. Protective, we'll cover that later, but it basically means it can be used inside the same package or by subclasses. But like I said, we'll cover that in more detail when we cover subclasses. For now, students should focus on the difference between public and private access modifiers. The final keyword means that something cannot be changed once it has been set. If applied to a variable, the value cannot be reassigned. If applied to a method, it means it cannot be overridden in a subclass. More on that in future lectures. If it's applied to a class, that means the class cannot be extended at all. Final is a guarantee that a piece of code will remain fixed or finalized. Methods define the behavior of a class. They are written with an access modifier, a return type, a method name, and a parameter list. For example, a public add method that takes two integers and returns their sum. Methods are where the logic of your class are defined. They are effectively the tools that make your class behave a certain way. The static keyword means that the member belongs to the class itself and not an individual instance or object. Static is often used for utility functions or for constants, like if you want to define pi or Euler's constant. You can call static methods without creating an object of the class, or what we might say creating an instance of the class. For example, math.square can be called directly without creating a math object instance. The toString method is very important. It defines what the class will return when converted into a string. Whenever you place an object inside of a print statement, Java automatically calls the toString method. If you override toString, you can decide exactly what should appear when your object is printed. So for example, student object might print as student : followed by the student's name. Without that, Java will provide that toString method by default, but it won't be anything really meaningful for a human to see. Let me take a moment to go to my computer. I want to demonstrate some of the topics that have been discussed in this lecture. I'll show you how to use IntelliJ to create a class, and I'll show you how to use the keywords that we've talked about, such as private and public and static. So give me a moment, let me pull up IntelliJ, and we'll show some examples. Here's IntelliJ. I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it Class Basics, Maven. I have a place where I'm going to push up to GitHub. I've selected my JDK. I'm going to have sample code just so it can create kind of a starter point for me. And I'm going to click Create. This window. So I'm going to erase all of this inside of here. Remove that breakpoint. And we'll leave this alone for the moment. I think one time I advertised it may be worthwhile to say, hey, let's check it out to make sure before we create too many things that everything's going to work. And then for new developers, this is sometimes a little bit, it saves time in case there's like a configuration problem. Hit run, and apparently we're good to go. So you can close this tab. Now I'm going to go here, and I want everybody to be aware of this. I can go here, and I can go here and I could click this and I can see appearance and I could say compact middle classes. Whenever you see me do that, notice that my package that I'm creating, so if I was going to be publishing this to Maven or whatever, Maven Central, even GitHub, this package will be what we publish. These other folders are just kind of like for the computer. But notice that we have io.github.nathanjrussell, because as we keep growing these dot names, we can start growing these folders or directories, or what we refer to as packages. So the difference between a package and a directory in the Java language, not really a difference. But if you notice that whenever I appearance and I compact these, notice that it doesn't compact these into a dot format. It just does what we might refer to as the package itself. Okay, so that takes maybe a little getting used to. So let's go ahead and create a new class. We're going to click Java class, and we're going to give it a name. And let's call it course. Since maybe we might be students learning Java, let's create a class that's going to encapsulate data for a course. Okay, don't ask again. Click cancel. We'll do all this later. All right, so in this course, let's decide what needs to go in here. First of all, I think whenever we define a course, there's always something called credit hours. So I'm going to do int, and I'm going to put credit hours. Let's make the access public for credit hours. And let's do public int, and I suppose we might need a course number. Like if you have CSE 220, this would be the number 220 here. Let's do public, and maybe we'll put string, and we'll put department code. That would be like CSE or your MTH or whatever it is that abbreviates in the catalog for students when they're selecting courses. Okay. Now I think we always have maybe a description. Okay. So let's stop there. We've got, well, maybe we need to have a title. So we'll do public string, and then we'll put title. Okay. All right. So we have the class variables. Now what this means when they're public, it means that you can access them directly, and you could change their value or print their value without actually going through any special mechanisms inside the class to access them. Now, in my opinion, that should always be seen as risky. You really don't want people to be able to change things directly in a class like I have it, because what if somebody changes credit hours to like -2? There's some instances where an integer is just an integer, but in the context of what it's representing, it may not make sense. So what does it mean to have -2 credit hours? Let's create our constructor now. The way the constructor works is we'll say public, and we'll put course. Now, in this case, the constructor is effectively going to be a method that we can call. And since this is just a very simple data encapsulation course, we're just simply going to take in, whenever we initialize this class, we're going to let the user pass in credit hours, course number, title, department code first, title, description. Now that's the parameters that will be passed into the constructor. The constructor of a class is effectively the method that gets called whenever we need the class to kind of do a few things to get everything prepared for you to be able to use it. So think of it as constructing the class. Okay, now in this case, I want you guys to see that this will be what the user passes in, and these will be the variables where it's going to store the data. Notice that I have these variables named identical to this. Okay, now that may cause a little bit of confusion. Notice that this is not going to really make a lot of sense whenever I do this. Credit hours equals that. So basically what you're doing is you're taking in whatever credit hours is being passed in, and it's basically setting it back to the value that it's already got. So IntelliJ is wanting to tell me we can remove this redundant assignment because it's not really doing anything. But the way I'm going to refer to this credit hours differently than this one is I'm going to use the keyword this. So this dot credit hours equals credit hours. Now here's what I want you guys to notice about IntelliJ. Notice that now you see where this was gray, letting me know that this was never used, and so maybe we could just get rid of it. See how it says safe delete this? If I was to do that, it would delete this. It would delete all these because they're not being used at the moment. Same way with these. It says you want to delete them. Notice that this is pink and that this is pink. Now whenever I click on this, notice that IntelliJ is like highlighting this to show where I'm highlighted at. It's kind of a faded pink look here. Notice up here that it highlighted this one too. This is IntelliJ just helping me keep track of which one is which. Now when I hover over this one and I click this, notice that it highlights it, but it highlights this one. These parameters are what the user is passing into the class to create an instance of it. These are the variables that will hold that data whenever the constructor builds the class up. So inside the constructor, we're saying set this class's credit hours to the parameters credit hours. So we're going to go through and do all of these. So we have credit hours, we have course number, we have department code, we have title, and we have description. And we're using all those things that got passed in, and we're setting the class values with this. Okay, So now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to get something called a getter. Typically classes that encapsulate data have something referred to as a setter and a getter. Setters are what you use to set values if the constructor doesn't do it. Getters are what you define to get values. So let's suppose that maybe somebody needs to be able to just get the credit hours from this class. Well, right now it's okay because they could just access credit hours directly. So we don't really need a getter or a setter whenever these are public. So let's go to main Java and let's use what we have so far. So we'll remove this. What I do is I say I'm going to create an instance of the class course. We're going to say this, and then I'm going to give it the identifier. So I'm going to say CSE 220. That would be my Java course. So this is where we're kind of passing in the top. We're creating an instance of the class course. So we're typing it here. This is our identifier to specifically represent that we're creating an instance to represent the CSE 220 course. And I'm going to use the keyword new, which means create a new instance of it. And here, this is going to be a little bit confusing because here's where we're using the top. But when we have the parentheses, that means that we're actually calling this constructor because it's kind of a method of sorts. And we refer to this method as the constructor. So if you look, when I hover over it, it's letting me know that these are all the parameters that I need to pass in. And see how powerful IntelliJ is. It's letting me know all the parameters that I need to pass in. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to say the first one is going to be course credit hours, and we're going to say there's 3 credit hours. Now here's what I want everybody to see. As you start typing, IntelliJ is kind of letting you know what you need. So at the moment, you see where this is a little bit more bold where it says course number? That's because I've typed in credit hours. Now IntelliJ is letting me know that I need to type in course number. Now, this part that you see right here in gray, this is very important. I get a lot of emails from students about this. Whenever they watch me code live in front of the class or whatever, students are always asking, what is this problem? Because I typed this in. You don't need to type this. I only typed the 3. This part right here is telling me from IntelliJ. This is an IntelliJ help me thing that I'm not typing. This is not something that I could copy, paste, change, or whatever. It's just letting me know that, hey, this value that I passed in is for the credit hours. And so the next one is course number, and so we'll put 220. Notice that IntelliJ did that for me, and I didn't do that. Okay, the next one. So the next one will be department code. So I'll say our department code is CSE, Computer Science and Engineering. Our next one, just hover over that little red mark, and we'll see that the next one should be title, and we'll put object-oriented programming. And for the description, I don't actually know what the full description of the course is, so I'll make one up that's just purely random. I'll say, this is where the members of the cool meet with Nathan. How about that? That'll work. So now we close this off and put the semicolon to terminate it. And notice that I have created an instance of CSE 220. The way I did it is I give a top, I give the identifier, I allocate space effectively to create a new instance of it, I call the constructor, and I populate all the values that need to be passed into this class in order for it to work. Okay, now let's go back to our class and notice that these are basically public access modifiers. So what that means is I could actually do system.out.print, and what we're going to do is we're going to do CSE 220, and I'm going to say dot. Now notice that IntelliJ here, this dot, whenever you do dot, everything that you see right here are things that I could select that are available from the Java class. So since they're public, that means that they're available. So I will do maybe the title. When I hit play, notice that it's printing the title, Object-Oriented Programming. Notice that I could print off the credit hours, and this should say 3. Yep, it says 3. Maybe I'll put a little bit of a label here. Okay, so we see credit hours 3. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say CSE 220 dot credit hours, and I'm going to say we're going to update that to be 4. And then I'm going to copy this. Notice that line 15 here is what this is coming from. Notice that at line 16 I changed it, and now it says 4 credit hours. The problem is that whenever you allow someone to have public access, it is very easy, but watch what somebody could do. They could do that, and then you could hit play. And notice that now we're claiming that we got some sort of course where it's actually going to take credit hours away from you just for taking it. That's not going to work. But how does Java know what the context of what you want to do really is? All you're doing is just declaring an integer. It has no idea what the scope is of these values. -4 is perfectly fine with Java, but it's not really fine for the domain that we're working in. Put this back at 4, and we'll leave it. The class, and I'm now going to change this credit hours. Since we don't want people to actually access it directly or to change it, I'm going to put private. Now look what IntelliJ is telling me. It says I got 3 related problems. So when I hover over this, it says private field is assigned but never accessed. Found problems related to credit hours. Field can be converted to a local variable. Field credit hours may be final. We're going to tackle all these individually. So in general, gray in IntelliJ is not bad. It just means that you've got something that you could delete. A yellow line means that you could probably do something a little better than what you got based on what it sees. And then whenever you see something red, 3 related problems, that means that we're going to have some issues. So let's go to main Java and let's just play this. And all of a sudden now we got some terrible red happening. It didn't run. Something went wrong. And notice what it says over here. Credit hours has private access in this class. Okay. Well, notice that we should not have hit, I'll close this. Notice that we should have never hit play to begin with. Anytime that you see these values right here, or these red squiggle marks, that means that there's going to be a compilation error and there's no point in trying because IntelliJ is not going to be able to do it. Notice that the error that I got from the compiler is exactly what IntelliJ is telling me that it would say, so there was no need to do it. I could have figured that out here. It has private access in this. So what we're going to say at the moment is that there is absolutely no way for me to get credit hours whatsoever. And I can't change it whatsoever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a getter and a setter. Public void, and I'm going to say set credit hour. Now, tell me IntelliJ is typically not familiar with everything that we might need. If you guys are curious, know that it's kind of helping out down here. This is basically what it's trying to help out with. It says set credit hours. Okay, that's great. Set credit hours. It knows that I'm creating a setter. This is IntelliJ helping me, and I can just click this. All right. Now, inside these parentheses, I'm going to pass in credit hours. This dot credit hours equals credit hours. Now, remember, whenever we say this means the class variables. So since they have the same name, notice that I had to use this to differentiate the class from the one of the parameters. So all this is doing is allowing me to set the credit hours without allowing direct access. There will be times in your career where you need a data encapsulation class to basically keep values set and finalized so that way they can't be mutated later. Imagine that this course class that we're using. Imagine that whenever I reach out to, maybe my Java program is going to reach out to the university database. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring in a list of courses that we offer at the university. Okay. Well, that means there's going to be a CSE 220. There's going to be a CSE 420. That means there's going to be a CSE 640. There's going to be a whole lot of classes. And what I want to do is I want to wrap those up into a data encapsulation class. I'm going to grab each one of those things from the database. Now, what you never want to do is you never want to create code that makes a user think something is happening that's not actually happening. We don't want the users that are getting data from the database to actually be able to change anything. We just want the data to be available. So what happens if we allow setters or public variables to be available whenever they're downloading this data. It might give the impression that when they update a value, it might be updating it on the database, but that's not the case. It would only be updating it here in the local Java instance. So to keep people from making that mistake, we should probably, whenever the constructor creates the instance for a course, we should probably make sure that once the value is set, it cannot be changed again. So notice that this set credit hours was just our way of just demonstrating a getter and a setter. But we've decided that once a value is set, nobody should be able to change it. So the only time it could be set is in the constructor. Okay, notice I deleted the setter. Now it's going to cause problems over here. Notice that this is no longer available and it says cannot resolve that. Whenever you see the word cannot or the phrase cannot resolve, that means it's not defined somewhere typically. So I'm going to delete that because we no longer want that to happen and we don't need this to be duplicated anymore. Now, at the moment, you may say, there is no real way for anybody to change this because, it's private and it's also, only got a getter. You have to think further. What if down the road somebody starts mutating your class and they're updating it? They may not know that you have always wanted, and they may not know that all throughout the other parts of the code they're using this class, you're relying on the fact that this is final. So even though there's no way at the moment for someone to update this from the outside world, how do you know that a developer later won't create a method that could allow it? So we're going to introduce the word final. This lets all the future developers know that they can't really mutate it, they can't change it, and they should not attempt to create anything that could change it. It also prevents anything from changing because Java won't allow it because now that it's final. Let me just demonstrate this. I'm going to delete this final keyword just for a moment, and inside my getter I'm going to say inside my getter I want to maybe increment it by 1, and what that's going to do is it's going to increment this by 1. So I'm going to go to main Java. Notice that the value that I'm passing in is a 3. I'm going to hit play, but notice that what happens is that it's a 4. Okay, and why? Because in my method I did this. Who knows why I would do that, but I did it. Now I'm going to go up here and I'm going to put the word final here. And notice that anytime you got an error inside your class, you'll see the name of the class with a big red underline. You'll see it all the way cascaded up through here. And then when you scroll down through your code, you realize, oh, it does not like this. Let's hover and see what happens. Cannot assign a value to a final variable. What that means is that since you marked it final, nobody can mutate that value again. The constructor set this value to credit hours based on what the user passed in earlier. That's what this line does, and this is where the user passed it in. And this is where it was actually given an exact value, creating this instance, this code. Okay. Now, so I had to get rid of this. So I think what we should do is we should basically make all of these private now. Private. Now, notice that when I marked it private, we got these yellow squiggle marks here, and those mean it will compile. Nothing's wrong, but IntelliJ says we could do something a hair better than what we got. So what we do is we hover over this and we say private field is assigned, but it's never accessed. Okay, well, that just means that I need to have a getter for it. So I'm going to do public int get course number, and I'm going to say return this course number. There we go. Now look, it's still not happy. So remember, when things are gray in IntelliJ, that means that we could erase it because it's not really being used anywhere. We may set it, but it's not really being used anywhere. Notice that this is now pink, but it's still complaining. It says field course number may be final. What IntelliJ is saying is that in no other part of the code are you updating the value other than the constructor. So what that means is if I click this, it's just going to add that keyword. And IntelliJ almost always suggests things that are safe. Now, it doesn't mean that going forward it does what you want. Public string get department code. There we go. And I guess we should just go ahead and do all these. Notice that IntelliJ will kind of help me along with this all along the way. We have created all the getters for this. And maybe to help out readability, let me go ahead and close these things off so we can see it at one time. So we have, again, complaining. But remember, it's noticing that we're not using or updating the value anywhere else. We're basically just getting the value. So guess what? We probably don't want anybody to mutate it anyway. So I'm going to hover and I'm going to say, make this final, make it final, make it final. Okay. So notice that all the variables are basically private and they can only be accessed using getters now. Okay, let's go back to the class and let's look at these getters. None of these values and none of these variables actually exist until you call the constructor and it has to construct the class. Remember, the constructor is a method that's got the same name as the class name. Okay, so if none of these values exist, it really doesn't make sense to be calling these getters since they don't exist. And in fact, until the constructor is called, these things do not exist either. And let's see if we can look at that. Let me comment all of this out that we've created. And let's go down here and let's try to use the course class directly without creating an instance of it. I'll do course dot. Notice that it's telling me that it's a class. Notice that it's telling me I can maybe create some sort of lambda expression with it. And notice that I could also use new to construct a new one. Okay. With that said, IntelliJ is basically saying there's not much you could do here because until you create an instance of your class, there's nothing that really can be done. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this and let's go to the class for a moment. Let's suppose that I need basically something that doesn't require an instance of the class, but I just needed to do something that anybody could use even if they don't create an instance of the class. Such as maybe tell everyone that I needed to say hello world, or basically just say the word hello world. I have no idea why we'd need that, but let's just suppose that we did. So what I could say is I could say public static. I don't want it to return anything. I just want it to say something. Public static void, and I'm going to say the method is going to be called say hello. And this is ridiculous, but let's see what happens. System.out.println, and I'm going to say hello. So remember before, whenever I typed in course and nothing was there, watch what happens now. When I do dot, notice that this says hello. And this little emblem, you'll get used to the IntelliJ emblems as you go along. This means that I could use these kind of methods, the static methods. Notice that I use the keyword static here. The static methods are available even if an instance of the course has not been defined. Now notice that I have not allocated space because I don't need to allocate space because I'm not creating an instance of the class. I'm only saying I need something to say hello. As ridiculous as it is, it works. But let's suppose that we need a class that we're just going to say, we need a few constants defined. Maybe I'll create a class. I'll call it static values. And inside of here, I'm just going to create a bunch of static methods. So we go over here to main, and let's suppose someone says, hey, where do I get those values? They say, well, you can actually get those values because we define them in the class called static value. There we go. And then we'll print out and we print these off and we have it. Okay, so I've reset my code a little bit. Now, suppose that I need to somehow create a way for it to print off all the information. Like when somebody gets this class, I needed to say, oh, print this, print this, print this, print this. So that way everybody has all the information associated with it. Notice that when I do CSC 220 and I hit the dot, IntelliJ is going to show me all of these things that are available. Notice that all of these are my getters that I defined, but notice there's something here called toString. I never defined toString here. None of this says toString anywhere, so where's that coming from? It turns out that classes in Java sometimes automatically have certain methods associated with it, even when you don't define them. So for example, the one that I want to show you right now is the toString method. So I've done the toString method, and it says system.out.println and or print new line. And notice that whenever I printed this, is actually given some sort of information about maybe where the class is located in memory, and it gives the information about the package. Well, I don't know how helpful this would be to anyone. Probably not helpful at all. Well, it turns out anytime you pass the identifier in a place where a string is expected, such as in println, and we're asking it to be printed, what's happening is the toString method, to be clear, this method, toString, is being automatically called anytime you ask Java to just simply print the class by referencing its identifier. Notice what happens when I run it again. Do you see how I got the exact same thing? So anytime that you use the class name inside of this print statement, well, let's suppose that whenever someone does this, you want it to print out something that's actually kind of meaningful. And we're going to do this. But let's just suppose we're going to stop with this. And I'm going to say return course info. Now notice that I have this toString defined. We go over here to main Java and notice that we have this, not complaining. I could call toString again, but it'll say it's redundant. So look what happens whenever I just say print the class using its identifier. I click print and notice what just got printed off down here. Okay, let's close this. Let's create another instance of a class. Okay. Now, whenever I do system and I say CSE 310, I'm going to print that off. And notice that I have two different courses. This information up here was from my CSE 220 course. This one right here is coming from my from my Math 310 course that I put. To summarize, the class name must match the file name. If it's called students.java, that means the public class must be called student. The constructor must be named the same as the class name. The package must be declared at the top of the file. Public and private are the keywords that define who can access your code. Public means that variables can be accessed outside the class and updated outside the class. That tends to be risky because you have no controls over what an end user or a new developer could put in those values. Private means only the methods inside the class can access and change the values. Protected is another keyword, but we'll cover that later. Final prevents changes from happening to a variable once it's been set. Methods, they define the behavior of your class. Those are what you use for defining getters and setters. Static, it means that the code belongs to the class and not to an object. Those methods declared as static means that they could be used without declaring an instance of the class. The toString, it controls what is shown when an object or class is printed. So all of these things go together, and we have now defined the basics of the class. We are far from defining all the elements of Java classes, and there are special classes that do special things, such as, in the example, we basically did a data encapsulation class. It turns out that that may not be super effective because Java actually has a very shorthand way of doing that, and we'll cover that in another lecture. So all we're doing is just trying to define a few basic keywords and the basic structure of a class. So thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this lecture. I hope that it was helpful. Please put comments in the video. Let me know what I did right. Let me know what I can improve on. And in the future, I'll try to use those comments to improve on the lecture videos. So until I see you guys in the next lecture, have a great day.